The check-in line at Vancouver International had been moving steadily for 20 minutes. And then it stopped. Every person in Hall C knew why. They could hear him from 30 feet away. This is absolutely unacceptable. The man's voice carried like he wanted it to. I booked Premium Select. Premium. Do you understand what that means, or do I need to explain it to you? Simone. No, not Simone. The woman behind the Air Pacific counter was named Petra. No, her name tag read Ren. No, that was taken too. Her name tag read Flora Chen, and she had not moved. Her hands were flat on the counter. Her expression was the practiced stillness of someone who had absorbed this kind of weather many times before, and had learned that the storm always passed faster if you didn't lean into it. The man's name was Broderick Hale. He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered in the way that suggested he had once been an athlete and had since converted that build into something more boardroom appropriate. His coat was charcoal cashmere. His carry-on was matte black with a monogram tag. He had flown internationally at least 40 times in the past 3 years, which he had already mentioned twice. Sir, I can see your booking, Flora said. Premium Select is showing confirmed. The issue is that your original seat was reassigned due to an aircraft swap this morning. The replacement aircraft has a different configuration. I'm finding you an equivalent. An equivalent. He said the word like it was an insult. You're telling me the seat I paid $4,000 for no longer exists and you're offering me an equivalent. I'm telling you I'm locating a seat in the same cabin class with the same. Who is your supervisor? Flora didn't flinch. I can get a supervisor if you'd like. That will take approximately 8 to 10 minutes, and your boarding window opens in 35. The man leaned forward on the counter. Not threateningly, just close enough to make the point that he was taking up space and intended to keep taking it. You people always hide behind process. I fly this airline 4 times a year. I am a platinum member. And today, the single most important travel day of my calendar, I have a keynote at a conference that 300 people are attending tomorrow morning. You're telling me my seat doesn't exist. I'm telling you I'm finding you a better one, Flora said quietly. Don't patronize me. The man 2 spots behind Broderick in the line shifted his weight. A woman near the windows looked up from her phone. A small girl standing beside her mother watched Broderick with the wide, unblinking attention of a child who senses that an adult is doing something wrong but hasn't yet learned the word for it. Sir. Flora's voice didn't waver. I have a window seat in row 4, which is actually 2 rows further forward than your original assignment, with the same meal service and the same lounge access. I can assign it now, or I can get my supervisor, but I want to be honest with you. There's nothing a supervisor can do that I can't do from this terminal. Broderick stared at her. You think you're very clever, don't you? It wasn't a question. I think you have a keynote tomorrow morning, Flora said. And I'd like to make sure you get there. He straightened up, ran a hand along his jaw. Fine. He pointed at the screen like the screen had also offended him. But I'm filing a complaint about this entire interaction. Your name, Flora Chen, I'll remember it. You're welcome to, she said. Your boarding pass is printing now. Gate D7, have a good flight, Mr. Hale. He took the pass without looking at her and walked away. The woman 2 spots behind him stepped up to the counter and said quietly, You handled that beautifully. Flora smiled, said nothing, moved on to the next booking. She was wrong to think that was the end of it. Broderick Hale's conference was called the Pacific Innovation Summit. It was held at the Fairmont waterfront in downtown Vancouver, 3 days of panels, keynotes, and networking dinners for what the brochure described as Canada's most forward-thinking minds in infrastructure investment. Broderick was scheduled to speak on the second morning. A 45-minute address on sustainable urban development financing, a topic on which he had written 2 books, been quoted in 6 national publications and delivered some version of this same talk 17 times in the past 4 years. He landed without incident. His hotel room was ready early. He slept well. He had breakfast in his room, reviewed his notes, changed into his best navy suit, and rode the elevator down to the conference hall feeling, as he often did before these moments, like a man who had worked very hard to earn exactly where he was standing. The hall was already arranged when he arrived. Round tables of 8, centerpieces of white birch and evergreen, a stage with a clean minimalist backdrop and the summit's logo projected in soft blue. The event coordinator met him at the side entrance, confirmed his tech requirements, showed him where the water would be. Everything was in order. He was early. He took a seat near the back to watch the room fill. That was when he saw her. She was standing near the registration desk speaking with 2 men in suits. She wore a deep burgundy blazer over a cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back simply, a lanyard around her neck with a badge that read speaker. She was laughing at something one of the men had said. Not the polished laugh of someone performing charm, but the real kind, quick and unself-conscious. Broderick sat up straighter. It was the woman from the check-in counter, Flora Chen. He was certain of it. She had the same face, the same quality of stillness in how she held herself, the same. But that made no sense. She was a check-in agent. She had been wearing a uniform 18 hours ago. She had printed his boarding pass. He assumed he was wrong. He was good at convincing himself he was wrong when the alternative explanation was inconvenient. The room filled. The summit's host took the stage. Opening remarks. Housekeeping, a brief video on the year's theme, equity in infrastructure. And then, the first introduction of the morning. Our opening keynote speaker today needs very little introduction to anyone who works in impact investment in this country. She founded Northtide Capital Partners at 32. She's since deployed over $800 million into sustainable housing and transit infrastructure across 6 Canadian provinces. The federal government's advisory panel on community infrastructure named her to their board last spring. She's also, I'm told, a deeply reluctant public speaker, which means we're lucky to have her. Please welcome Dr. Flora Chen. The room applauded. Broderick did not move. She walked to the stage from the same cluster near the registration desk, shook the host's hand, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room with that same quality of calm, like she had done this before and would do it again. And neither fact particularly impressed or frightened her. "Good morning," she said. "I want to start with something that happened to me yesterday." The room settled. "I was working a shift at the Air Pacific check-in counter at YVR. A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. A few people smiled, assuming this was the setup to something funny. "I do that twice a month," Flora continued. "My mother worked for Air Pacific for 22 years. Ground crew, then check-in, then training coordination. She put my brother and me through school on that salary. When she retired, I asked the airline if I could take occasional volunteer shifts. Not in a management capacity, just at the counter doing what she did. It keeps me connected to something I think about a lot. The difference between how institutions treat people they've identified as important, and how they treat everyone else." The room was very quiet now. "Yesterday, a man came through my line who was upset about a seat reassignment. His frustration was understandable. It was a legitimate inconvenience, and I want to say that clearly. But the way he expressed that frustration in front of a full line of people was not directed at the inconvenience. It was directed at me. Specifically at the assumption that I was the kind of person who could be spoken to that way without consequence." Broderick's hands were cold. "He told me he would remember my name. I think he meant it as a threat. I want to tell you this morning that I thought about that on the flight. I was on the same plane, as it happens, and I thought about my mother, who absorbed that kind of interaction hundreds of times and never once took it home with her," she said. "The way someone speaks to you when they think you can't do anything for them tells you everything you need to know about who they actually are." She paused. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to talk about equity in infrastructure. But I think it's worth saying, before we spend 3 days discussing how we build systems that treat people with dignity, that the way we build those systems reflects the values we actually hold, not the ones we write into mission statements. Those values show up in the smallest interactions. At a check-in counter, in an elevator, in how we speak to the person who carries our bag or clears our table or answers our call." Broderick looked at the exit. It was to his left, 20 feet away, past 7 seated people and a display table of conference materials. He did not move. "So," Flora opened the folder in front of her, "let's talk about money. Specifically, about where it goes and who gets to decide." She spoke for 42 minutes. She was not a reluctant speaker. Whoever had said that was wrong. She was precise and unhurried, moving between data and story without losing the thread of either. She talked about a housing project in Winnipeg that had been stalled for 6 years by a financing gap that her firm had eventually bridged. She talked about a transit corridor in Nova Scotia that 3 previous investment groups had declined because the return timeline was long. And what happened to that community in the intervening decade. She talked about what it cost in real terms to undervalue the places and people that larger capital markets had decided were not worth their attention. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. Broderick did not clap. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the stage and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, which was the specific discomfort of understanding, with no room for argument, that he had been exactly wrong. Not wrong about the seat, about the person. He had looked at Flora Chen and seen a function, a role, someone positioned to be useful to him for 90 seconds and then forgotten. He had not asked himself, even briefly, who she was outside of what she was doing. He hadn't considered the possibility that there was anything outside of what she was doing that might matter. He was 51 years old and had given his own talk about dignity in development 17 times. And he had stood at an airport counter and spoken to a woman the way you speak to someone you've decided doesn't count. The session broke for coffee. Broderick stood. He was scheduled to deliver his keynote in 90 minutes, and he had no idea what he was going to say. Flora was immediately surrounded. The host, other speakers, 2 people with business cards already extended. Broderick moved toward the coffee station, poured a cup he didn't want, stood near the windows overlooking the harbor. He spent 20 minutes trying to decide whether to approach her and another 10 deciding what he would say if he did. He had given enough speeches to know that an apology that centered itself, that became primarily about the discomfort of the person apologizing, was not really an apology at all. It was a request for absolution dressed up as accountability. He had said that exact thing, in those exact words, in a panel about corporate responsibility 2 years ago in Toronto. He thought about that and felt worse. She found him, as it turned out. Not because she had been looking. She was walking toward the windows with her own coffee, when she glanced over and stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Dr. Chen," he said, "I don't know if you—" "I recognized you when you sat down," she said. There was no particular expression on her face. She wasn't cold, but she wasn't warm. She was simply present, the same quality of attention she'd had behind the counter. "I owe you an apology." "You do," she said. "I spoke to you in a way that I wouldn't want to be spoken to. There's no version of that where the pressure I was under, or the inconvenience I was experiencing makes it acceptable. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, and I did it anyway, which is worse than not knowing." Flora was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the harbor. "My mother used to say that people show you who they are when they think the situation is low stakes," she said. "You thought it was low stakes. That's the part that matters." No. "I'm not angry," she said. "I want you to understand that. I've had that interaction 100 times in different forms. What I am is tired of the gap between what people say they believe about equity and how they actually move through the world when no one they respect is watching." Broderick looked at his coffee. "Your talk was very good." "Thank you. I mean it. I've been giving my own version of similar material for years, and I don't think I've ever connected it to the personal the way you did." Flora turned to look at him directly. "What are you speaking about this morning?" "Sustainable development financing, urban infrastructure. I have notes." He paused. "I'm not sure they're the right notes anymore." Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but the slight loosening of something guarded. "What would the right notes look like?" "I think I'd have to be honest about the gap you described, between what we build and who we are when we're not building anything. I've been writing about dignity and development for 15 years, and yesterday I treated a person at an airport counter like she was a vending machine that wasn't working properly." He said it plainly, without the softening instinct he usually brought to self-criticism. "That's not an abstraction. That's the actual problem." Flora was quiet for a long moment. "Then say that," she said. "People won't love it." "Some of them will," she said. "The ones who needed someone to say it first." She finished her coffee and set the cup down on the windowsill. "Good luck with your talk, Mr. Hale." She turned to go. "Broderick," he said. She looked back. "My name, if Broderick." Flora Chen nodded, once, with the unhurried steadiness that was apparently just how she existed in the world. And then she walked back toward the cluster of people waiting for her, her burgundy blazer very straight, her badge catching the light as she moved. Broderick stood at the window for another 5 minutes. Then he went to find the event coordinator and asked for an extra 10 minutes to revise his notes. He didn't use notes in the end. He stood at the podium and looked out at 300 people and said, "I want to start with something I'm not proud of, because I think it's directly relevant to everything I was going to tell you today." The room, which had been settling, went still. "Yesterday I was rude to a service worker at an airport. Not because she had done anything wrong, because I was stressed and self-important, and I had decided, without thinking about it consciously, that the interaction didn't matter. That she didn't matter in the way that mattered." He paused. "I found out this morning that she is Dr. Flora Chen, which some of you know is roughly equivalent to discovering you've been dismissive to the person who wrote the textbook you've been teaching from. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The problem isn't that I didn't know who she was. The problem is that it mattered to me when I found out. That my assessment of her changed because of her credentials. That somewhere in my operating system, in the part that runs beneath the speeches and the value statements in the books I've written, I was still running the old code, the code that says, people are worth your courtesy in proportion to what they can do for you." The room was completely silent. "I don't think that's who any of us want to be," he said. So let's talk about how systems reflect that code, and what it actually costs to rewrite it. He spoke for 50 minutes. When he finished, the applause was different from the kind he usually received. Quieter, slower, as if the room needed an extra moment before it knew what to do. He didn't see Flora before he left the conference. He heard later, from the event coordinator, that she had left after lunch to catch a flight back to Toronto, where her firm's offices were, where her team was in the middle of closing a deal on a community land trust in Scarborough. He didn't try to contact her. It didn't seem like the right thing. She had not asked for his continued attention, and he had already taken enough of hers. What he did when he got home was call his office and schedule a review of how his firm handled client services interactions, not from the top down but from the bottom up. He asked 3 of his junior staff members, in separate conversations, whether they had ever felt that the way leadership spoke to them depended on who was watching. 2 of them hesitated before answering. That hesitation told him everything. It took most of a year. It was not comfortable. Several meetings went long. One senior partner resigned over what he called a change in culture I didn't sign up for, which Broderick thought was probably accurate and also probably fine. The following spring, Northtide Capital Partners and Broderick's firm co-invested in a mixed-income housing development outside Halifax. Flora's team led the financing structure, his team led the municipal partnership. They were professional. They were good at their work. They did not become friends, exactly. But they became people who respected each other in the specific way that comes from having seen each other clearly. At an airport counter and at a podium, and in the long difficult work of trying to mean what you say. At the project's groundbreaking, a junior associate from Broderick's team, a young man named Callum, no, that was taken, a young man named Reed, who had been in his first week at the firm when Broderick started the internal review, said to him quietly, "I didn't understand why we were doing all of that at first. The listening sessions and the restructuring and all of it. I thought it was optics." He paused. "I get it now." Broderick looked out at the construction site, at the framing that would eventually become 240 homes, at the people in hard hats moving across the ground. His industry had spent 20 years deciding wasn't worth touching. "It's not about the grand gestures," he said. "It's about who you are in the small moments, when you think no one important is watching." Reed nodded, let the silence hold for a second, then said, "Dr. Chen said almost exactly the same thing to our team last week." Broderick smiled and said nothing, and watched the work continue.